Hello my lovelies, MyLovelyShadow here. In just 2 days, Scott Cawthon will be releasing the all-new sequential sequel to Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes, called Five Nights at Freddy's The Twisted Ones. Now, I know what y'all are thinking. Most of y'all have probably not read the first book yet, haven't you? Come on, don't lie to me. I know, it's okay. You can be honest. I haven't read the first one either, but lucky for you, I have a little surprise for you guys. I have here the entire Five Nights at Freddy's Silver Eyes book, but I will be taking the time to read it and share it as a Shadow Reads type of thing, so maybe I can share the book with you guys. No, not the Twisted Ones. No, I'm confusing y'all already, am I? This is about me reacting / reading to you guys and myself Five Nights at Freddy's The Twisted Ones. It's not the full book, but it's a free sample that I got on iTunes. So we are lucky enough, or at least I was lucky enough, to get this sample, and now I have it right here and I'm about to read it to you guys. And I'm sorry that the camera quality is really bad, but like I said, my face camera is being used by someone else, so this will have to do. But nonetheless, hope you guys will enjoy Five Nights at Freddy's Scott Cawthon's The Twisted Ones sample preview. I don't even know why that became a thing, but yeah. Anyways, enjoy. Don't trust your eyes. Dr. Treadwell walked back and forth across the platform at the front of the auditorium. Her steps were slow and even, almost hypnotic. Your eyes deceive you every day, filling in the blanks for you in a world of sensory overload. An image of dizzying geometric detail lit up the canvas screen behind her. When I say sensory overload, I mean that quite literally. At every moment, your senses are receiving far more information than they can process all at once, and your mind is forced to choose which signals to pay attention to. It does that based on your experiences and your expectation of what is normal. The things we are familiar with are the things we can, for the most part, ignore. We see this most easily with olfactory fatigue. Your nose ceases to perceive a smell when you've been around it for a while. You may be quite thankful for this phenomenon, depending on the habits of your roommate. The class tittered dutifully, then became quiet as the image of another multicolored design flashed onto the screen. The professor gave a hint of a smile and continued. Your mind creates motion when there is none. It fills in colors and trajectories based on what you've seen before and calculates what you should be seeing now. Another image flashed onto the overhead screen. If your mind didn't do this, then simply walking outside and seeing a tree would consume all your mental energy, leaving no resources to do anything else. In order for you to function in the world, your mind fills in the spaces of that tree with its own leaves and branches. 100 pencils scribbled all at once, filling the lecture hall with they sound like scary mice. It's why when you enter a house for the first time, you experience a moment of dizziness. Your mind is taking in more than usual. It's drawing a floor plan, creating a palette of colors, and saving an inventory of images to draw on later. So you don't have to go through that exhausting intake every single time. The next time you enter that same house, you'll already know where you are. Charlie! An urgent voice whispered her name. Inches from her ear, Charlie kept writing. She was staring straight ahead at the display at the front of the lecture hall as Dr. Treadwell went on. She paced faster, occasionally flinging an arm toward the screen to illustrate her point. Her words seemed to be falling behind as her mind raced on ahead. Charlie had realized by the second day of classes that her professor sometimes broke off in the middle of one sentence, only to finish an entirely different one. It was like she skimmed the text in her head, reading out a few words here and there. Most of the students in her robotics class found it maddening, but Charlie liked it. It made the lesson kind of like doing a puzzle. The screen flashed again, displaying an assortment of mechanical parts and a diagram of an eye. This is what you must recreate. Dr. Treadwell stepped back from the image, turning to look at it with the class. Basic artificial intelligence is all about sensory control. You won't be dealing with a mind that can filter these things out for itself. You must design programs that recognize basic shapes while discarding unimportant information. You must do for your robot what your own mind does for you. Create a simplified and organized assembly of information based on what's relevant. Let's start by looking at some examples of basic shape recognition. Charlie, hissed the voice again, and she waved her pencil impatiently at the figure peering over her shoulder for her friend Artie, trying to shoo him away. The gesture cost her a moment, put her half a step behind the professor. She hurried to catch up, anxious not to miss a single line. The paper in front of her was covered in formulas, notes in the margins, sketches and diagrams. She wanted to get everything down all at once, not just the math, but all the things it made her think of. If she could tie the new facts to things she already knew, she'd retain it much more easily. She felt hungry for it, alert, watching for new tidbits of information like a dog under the dinner table. A boy near the front raised his hand to ask a question, and Charlie felt a brief flare of impatience. Now the whole class would have to stop while Treadwell went back to explain a simple concept. Charlie let her mind wander, sketching absently in the margins of her notebook. John would be here in... She glanced restlessly at her watch. An hour. I told him maybe someday we'll see each other again. I guess it's someday. He had called out of the blue. I'm just going to be passing through, he said, and Charlie hadn't bothered to ask how he knew where she was. Of course he would know. There was no reason not to meet him, and she found herself alternately excited and filled with dread. Now, and she absently sketched rectangular forms along the bottom of her notepaper. Her stomach jumped, a little spasm of nerves. It felt like a lifetime since she last saw him. Sometimes it felt like she'd seen him yesterday, as if the last year hadn't passed. But of course it had, and everything had changed for Charlie once again. That May, the night of her 18th birthday, the dreams had begun. Charlie was long accustomed to nightmares, the worst moments of her past forced up like bile, into twisted versions of memories already too terrible to recall. She shoved these dreams into the back of her mind in the morning and sealed them away, knowing they would only breach it when night fell again. These dreams were different. When she woke, she was physically exhausted, not just drained, but sore. Her muscles weak. Her hands were stiff and aching, like they'd been clenched into fists for hours. These new dreams didn't come every night, but when they did, they interrupted her regular nightmares and took them over. It didn't matter if she was running and screaming for her life, or wandering aimlessly through a dull mismatch of the various places she'd been all week. Suddenly, from nowhere, she would sense him. Sammy, her lost twin brother, was near. She knew he was present the same way she knew that she was present. And whatever the dream was, it dropped away. People, places, light, and sound. Now she was searching for him in the darkness, calling his name. He never answered. She would drop to her hands and knees, feeling her way through the dark, letting his presence guide her until she came to a barrier. It was smooth and cold metal. She couldn't see it, but she hit it hard with one fist, and it echoed. "Sammy?" she would call, hitting harder. She stood, reaching up to see if she could scale the slick surface, but it stretched far above her head. She beat her fists against the barricade until they hurt. She screamed her brother's name until her throat was raw, until she fell to the floor and leaned on the solid metal, pressing her cheek to its cool surface and hoping for a whisper from the other side. He was there. She knew it was surely, and if he was a part of herself. She knew in those dreams that he was present. Worse, when she was awake, she knew he was not there. In August, Charlie and Aunt Jen had their first fight. They'd always been too distant to really argue. Charlie never felt the need to rebel because Jen provided no real authority. And Jen never took anything Charlie did personally, never tried to stop her from doing anything, as long as she was safe. The day Charlie moved in with her at the age of 7, Aunt Jen had told her plainly that she was not a replacement for Charlie's parents. By now, Charlie was old enough to understand that Jen had meant it as a gesture of respect, a way to reassure Charlie that her father wouldn't be forgotten, that she would always be his child. But at the time it had seemed like an admonishment. Don't expect parenting, don't expect love, and so Charlie hadn't. Charlie had never wanted for food or clothing, and Jen had taught her to cook, to take care of the house, to manage her money, and to fix her own car. You have to be independent, Charlie. You have to know how to take care of yourself. You have to be stronger than she cut herself off. But Charlie knew how the sentence ended. Than your father. Charlie shook her head, trying to jerk herself free of her own thoughts. What's wrong? Artie said next to her. Nothing, she whispered. She ran her pencil again and again over the same lines. Up, over, down, over. The graphite wearing thicker and thicker. Charlie had told Jen that she was going back to Hurricane, and Jen's face turned stony, her skin paling. Why would you want to do that? She asked with a dangerous calm in her voice. Charlie's heart beat faster. Because that's where I lost him. Because I need him more than I need you. The thought of returning had been nagging on her for months, growing stronger with each passing week. One morning she awoke and the choice was made. Final. Sitting in her mind with this solid weight. Jessica's going to college at St. George, she told her aunt. She's starting the summer semester so I can stay with her while I'm there. I want to see the house again. There's still so much I don't understand. It just feels important. She finished weakly, faltering at Jen's eyes. Dark blue like marble, fixed on her. Jen didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said simply, no. Why not? Charlie might once have said, you let me go before. But after what happened last year, when she and Jessica and the others went back to Freddy's and discovered the horrifying truth behind the murders at her father's old pizzeria, things had changed between them. Charlie had changed. Now she met Jen's gaze determined. I'm going, she said, trying to keep her own voice steady. Then everything exploded. Charlie didn't know which of them started shouting first, but she screamed until her throat was fiery and sore, hurling at her aunt every pain she'd ever inflicted, every hurt she had failed to prevent. Jen shouted back that she only ever meant to care for Charlie, that she had always done her best, flinging reassuring words that somehow dripped with poison. I'm leaving! Charlie screamed with finality. She started for the door, but Jen grabbed her arm, yanking her violently back. Charlie stumbled, almost falling before she caught herself on the kitchen table, and Jen let her hand drop with a shocked expression. There was silence, and then Charlie left. She packed a bag, feeling as if she had somehow diverged from reality into an impossible parallel world. Then she got in her car and drove away. She didn't tell anyone she was going. Her friends here were not close friends. There was no one she owed an explanation. When Charlie got to Hurricane, she intended to go straight to her father's house, to stay there for the next few days until Jessica arrived on campus. But as she reached the city limits, something stopped her. I can't, she thought. I can't ever go back. She turned the car around, drove straight to St. George, and slept in her car for a week. It was only after Charlie knocked and Jessica opened the door with a startled expression that Charlie realized that she never actually mentioned her plans to Jessica, on whom they all depended. She told her everything, and Jessica hesitantly offered to let her stay. Charlie had slept on the floor the rest of the summer, and as the fall semester approached, Jessica didn't ask her to leave. It's nice to have someone who knows me here, she had said, and uncharacteristically, Charlie hugged her. Charlie had never cared about high school. She never paid much attention in her classes, but A's and B's came easily for her. She had never really thought about liking or disliking her subjects, though sometimes one teacher or another would make her feel a spark of interest for a year. Charlie hadn't thought much beyond the end of the summer, but as she idly flipped through Jessica's course catalog and saw advanced courses in robotics, something clicked into place. St. George was among the colleges she'd been accepted into earlier than year. Though she hadn't really intended to go to any of them, now, however, she went to the administrative's office and pleaded her case until she was allowed to enroll, despite having missed the deadline by months. There's still so much I don't understand, Charlie wanted to learn, and the things she wanted to learn were very specific. Of course, there were things she had to learn before a robotics course would make any sense at all. Math had always been straightforward and functional, sort of like a game to Charlie. You did the thing you were supposed to do and got the answer. but it had never been a very interesting game. It was fun to learn something new, but then you had to keep doing it for weeks or months, bored out of your skull. That was high school. But in her first calculus class, something had happened. It was as if she'd been laying bricks for years, forced to work slowly, seeing nothing but her motor and her towel. Then suddenly someone pulled her back a few steps and said, "Here, look, you've been building this castle. Go play inside." "And that's all for today," Professor Treadwell said, at last. Charlie looked down at her paper, realizing she had never stopped moving her pencil. She had worn dark lines right through the page and drawn on the desk. She rubbed the marks half-heartedly with her sleeve, then opened her binder to put away her notes. Artie poked his head over her shoulder, and she closed it hastily, but he had already gotten a good look. "What is that, a secret code? Abstract art?" "It's just math," Charlie said a little curtly, and put the notebook in her bag. Artie was cute in a goofy way. He had a pleasant face, dark eyes, and curly brown hair that seemed to have a life of its own. He was in 3 of her 4 classes and had been following her around since the beginning of the semester like a stray duckling. To her surprise, Charlie found that she didn't mind it. As Charlie left the auditorium, Artie looked up his now accustomed place at her side. "So, did you decide about the project?" he asked. "Project?" Charlie vaguely remembered something about a project he wanted to do together. He gave a little nod, waiting for her to catch up. "Remember? We have to design an experiment for chem. I thought we could work together. You know, with your brains and my looks." He trailed off, grinning. "Yeah, that sounds... I have to go meet someone," she interrupted herself. "You never meet anyone," he said, surprised, blushing bright red as soon as the words were out of his mouth. I didn't mean it that way. Not that it's any of my business, but who is it?" He gave a broad smile. "John," Charlie said without elaboration. Artie looked crestfallen for a moment, but recovered quickly. "Of course, yeah, John. Great guy," he said teasingly. He raised his eyebrows, prompting for details, but she gave none. "I didn't know that you had a... That's cool." Artie's face took on a look of careful neutrality. Charlie looked at him oddly. She hadn't meant to imply that she and John were a couple, but she didn't know how to correct him. She couldn't explain who John was to her without telling Artie far more than she wanted him to know. They walked in silence for a minute across the main quad, a small grassy square surrounded by bricks and concrete buildings. "So, is John from your hometown?" Artie asked at last. "My hometown is 30 minutes away. This place is basically just an extension of it," Charlie said. "But yeah, he's from Hurricane." Artie hesitated, then leaned in closer to her, glancing around as if someone might be listening. "I always meant to ask you," he said. Charlie looked at him wearily. "Don't ask about it. I'm sure people ask you about it all the time. But come on, you can't blame me for being curious. That stuff about the murders, it's like an urban legend around here. I mean, not just around here, everywhere. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Stop!" Charlie's fists were suddenly immobile. She felt as if moving it, making any expression at all, would require an arcane skill she no longer possessed. Artie's face had changed too. His easy smile drained away. He looked almost frightened. Charlie bit the inside of her lip, willing her mouth to move. "I was just a kid when all that happened," she said quietly. Artie nodded, quickly and skittish. Charlie made her face move into a smile. "I have to go meet Jessica," she lied. "I have to get away from you." Artie nodded his head again like a bobblehead doll. She turned and walked away towards the dorm, not looking back. Charlie blinked into the sunlight. Flashes of what happened last year at Freddy's were battling at her, snatches of memory plucking at her clothing with cold iron fingers. The hook above, poised to strike. No escape. A figure looming behind the stage. Red matted fur barely concealing the metal bones of the murderous creature. Kneeling in pitch dark on the cold tile floor of the bathroom. And then, that giant, hard plastic eye glaring through the crack. The hot miasma of lifeless breath of her face. And the other, older memory. The thought that made her ache in ways for which she had no words. sorrow filling her as if it had been wrought into her very bones. She and Sammy, her other self, her twin brother, were playing their quiet games in the familiar warmth of the costume closet. And the figure appeared in the doorway, looking down on them. Then Sammy was gone, and the world ended for the first time. Charlie was standing outside her own dorm room, almost without knowing how she'd gotten there. Slowly, she pulled her keys from her pocket and let herself into the room. The lights were off. Jessica was still in class. Charlie shut the door behind her, checking the lock twice, and leaned back against it. She took a deep breath. It's over now. She strained it decisively and snapped out of her overhead light, filling the room with a harsh illumination. The clock beside the bed told Charlie that she still had a little under an hour before John arrived. Time to work on her project. Charlie and Jessica had divided the room with a piece of masking tape after their first week living together. Jessica suggested jokingly, said she'd seen it in a movie, but Charlie had grinned and helped her measure the room. She knew Jessica was desperate to keep Charlie's mess off her side. The result was a bedroom that looked like a before and after picture, advertising either a cleaning service or a nuclear weapon, depending on whose side you looked at first. On Charlie's desk, there was a pillowcase, draped over two indistinct shapes. She went to her desk and removed it, folding it carefully and placing it on her chair. She looked at her project. "Hello," she said softly. Two mechanical faces were held upright on metal structures and attached to the length of boards. Their features were indistinct, like old statues worn away by rain, or new clay not yet fully sculpted. They were made of a malleable plastic, and where the backs of their head ought to be were instead networks of casings, microchips, and wires. Charlie bent down toward them, looking over every millimeter of her design, making sure everything was as she left it. She flipped a small black switch, and little lights blinked. Tiny cooling fans began to whir. They didn't move right away, but there was a change. The vague features took on a sense of purpose. Their blind eyes then turned to Charlie. They looked only at each other. "You," said the first. Its lips moved to shape the syllable, but never parted. They weren't made to open. "I," the second replied, making the same soft, constrained movement. "You are," said the first. "Am I?" said the second. Charlie watched her hand pressed over her mouth. She held her breath, afraid of disturbing them. She waited, but they had apparently finished, and were now simply looking at each other. "They can't see," Charlie reminded herself. She turned them off and pulled the board around so that she could peer into their backs. She reached inside and adjusted a wire. A key slid into the lock of the door, and Charlie startled at the sound. She snatched the pillowcase and threw it over the faces as Jessica entered the room. Jessica paused in the doorway with a grin. "What was that?" she asked. "What?" Charlie said innocently. "Come on, I know you were working on that thing you never let me see." She dropped her backpack on the floor, then flopped dramatically back on the bed. "Anyways, I'm exhausted," she announced. Charlie laughed, and Jessica sat up. "Come talk to me," she said. "What's up with you and John?" Charlie sat down in her own bed, across from Jessica. Despite their different lifestyles, she liked living with the other girl. Jessica was warm and bright, and while her ease as she went about the world still intimidated Charlie a little, now she felt like a part of it. Maybe being Jessica's friend meant absorbing some of her confidence. "I haven't seen him yet. I have to leave in..." She peered over Jessica's shoulder at the clock. 15 minutes. "Are you excited?" Jessica asked. Charlie shrugged. "I think so," she said. "You're not sure?" "I'm excited," Charlie admitted. "It's just been a long time." "Not that long," Jessica pointed out. Then she looked thoughtful. "I guess it sort of has been, though. Everything is so different since the last time we saw him." "So, you really want to see my project?" she asked, surprising herself. "Yes," Jessica declared. Springing from the bed, she followed Charlie to her desk. Charlie switched on the power, then flung off the pillowcase like a magician. Jessica gasped and looked at it in involuntary step back. What is it? She asked, her voice cautious. But before Charlie could answer, the first face spoke. Me, it said. You, the other replied. And they both fell silent again. Charlie looked at Jessica. Her friend had a panicked expression, like she was holding something tightly inside. I, the second face said. Charlie hurried to switch them off. Why do you have the look on your face? She said. Jessica took a deep breath and smiled at her. I just haven't had lunch yet, she said, but something lingered in her eyes. Jessica watched as Charlie replaced the pillowcase lovingly over the faces, as she was tucking the child into bed. She looked uncomfortably around the room. Charlie's half was a disaster. Clothes and books were strewn everywhere, but there were also the wires and computer parts, tools, screws, and pieces of plastic and metal Jessica didn't recognize, all jumbled up together. It wasn't just a mess, it was a chaotic tangle where you could lose anything, or hide anything, she realized, with a pang of guilt at the thought. Jessica turned her attention back to Charlie. What are you programming them to do? She asked, and Charlie smiled proudly. I'm not exactly programming them to do anything. I'm helping them learn on their own. Right. Of course. Obviously, Jessica said slowly. As she did, something caught her eye. A pair of shiny plastic eyes and long floppy ears were peering out from a pile of dirty laundry. Hey, I never noticed you brought Theodore, your little robo-rabbit, she exclaimed, pleased to have remembered the name of Charlie's childhood toy. Before Charlie could respond, she picked the stuffed animal up by his ears and came away with only his head. Jessica let out a shriek and dropped it, clamping a hand over her mouth. I'm sorry, Charlie said, hastily grabbing the rabbit's head off the floor. I took him apart to study. I'm using some of his parts in my project. She gestured at the thing on her desk. Oh, Jessica said, trying to hide her dismay. She glanced around the room and suddenly realized that the rabbit's parts were everywhere. His cotton ball tail was on Charlie's pillow, and the leg hung off the lamp above her desk. His torso lay in the corner, almost out of sight. Ripped open, savagely, Jessica looked at her friend's round, cheerful face and frizzy shoulder-length brown hair. Jessica closed her eyes for a long moment. Oh, Charlie, what's wrong with you? Jessica? Charlie said. The girl's eyes were closed, her expression pained. Jessica? This time she opened her eyes and gave Charlie a sudden, bright smile, turning on cheer like a faucet. It was disconcerting, but Charlie had gotten used to it. Jessica blinked hard like she was resting her brain. So, are you nervous about seeing John? She asked. Charlie thought for a moment. No, I mean, why should I be? It's just John, right? Charlie tried to laugh but gave up. Jessica, I don't know what to talk about, she burst out suddenly. I don't know what to talk about with him, Charlie said. If we don't have something to talk about, then we'll start talking about what happened last year. And I just can't. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hate to break this to you, but this is the end of the free sample that was given by the Five Nights at Freddy's The Twisted Ones, and this was only chapter 1. That's right, it was only chapter 1. Oh my gosh, I need to start reading the first book. But no worries, I will be starting to read this book and maybe share it with you guys. Maybe call it, like I said, a Shadow Reads thing, like I said in the beginning. But oh my gosh, this is already getting really, really good. And judging by the cover of The Twisted Ones, it looks like Nightmare Bonnie. The first book is Twisted Freddy, or Nightmare Freddy, what am I saying? I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Let me know in the comments down below if you want me to read this book when it comes out. And let me know in the comments down below if you want me to read the first book, so that way you guys don't have to worry about a single thing on buying it or trying to buy it for yourself, like online, or trying to buy like the book copy. But if you guys want to and read along, you can, feel free. I just want to try this out for fun. Also, I needed to catch up with this Five Nights at Freddy's novels because I've been wanting for so long to read this and I never got a chance to, so why not start here? But thank you everybody so much for watching. I will see all you lovelies in the next video. Peace, thank you, and good night.